This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday. I have a very special guest today, someone who is visiting Ohio University, but who knows it very well because she's a graduate of Ohio University. And this is Lisa Maatz from AAUW in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Thank you so much for having me, Lois.
What is your official title, Lisa?
I'm the Vice President for Government Relations and Advocacy. That means essentially I run our policy shop. So I think the easiest way to explain it is that I'm a lobbyist, but I use my powers for good.
Yes, and public policy is your field, right?
Public policy is my field, yeah. I studied political science and sociology right here at OU back in the late 80s, got a women's studies certificate, and it's really been an amazing experience.
Yes. Well, I remember the 80s. I was on the school board in Athens at the time, which was quite an interesting experience. I sometimes wonder if being on the school board is one of the harder jobs in public policy work.
Oftentimes it is. Mayors, school boards, city councils, because there's a lot of big ticket issues they have to deal with, but they also have to deal with things like, you know, trash removal and sewer systems and water bills, and I mean, they're the things that make the town work, but it's not usually, it's not a glamorous political kind of endeavor, yeah.
Well, that's true, and then obviously parents are always most interested in their children.
Of course.
And so if you're on the school board, you're having problems sometimes with teachers, principals, coaches. I mean, as far as the parents are concerned, they may come to you with problems.
Yes, yes.
But, of course, the personnel who work for the schools are not too happy to have anyone making any criticism of them, and so there's that problem as well. But I was on the school board for actually 3 terms, so that was 6 years. And then the voters set me free.
They said, "See you, Lois. Thanks for your service."
Right. Well, it was a very interesting experience, and having been a teacher myself, mostly with upper elementary children.
It gives you a unique perspective.
Yes, it gives you a perspective. And I also had a master's degree in education from the University of Michigan, which is where I met my husband. And we came to Ohio University in 1964.
Oh, okay.
So we've been here quite a long time.
I was going to say, that's a long time.
50 years plus.
And have you been a member of AAUW the whole time?
Yes. I'm actually a legacy because my mother was active in AAUW, the American Association of University Women. In my home state of Nevada, she helped to found a couple of branches in small towns.
Yeah.
We're not talking Reno or Las Vegas, but small towns have university women graduates as well.
Of course they do.
And so I always felt that AAUW was so important because of its mission.
Well, you know, I love to think of AAUW as kind of the original uppity women, because we were founded back in 1881.
Yes.
And this was when women were not going to college, but yet AAUW members were kind of breaking that ground, getting degrees, and then, Lois, they had the nerve to actually want to do something with those degrees. They wanted to help their communities. They wanted to go to work, maybe get a graduate degree. And we've been breaking ground ever since. I'm really proud of the legacy that we've got. And I've been excited the last couple of days I've been here in Athens to see the Athens branch reinvigorated and to see that we have a student chapter, and that AAUW is also, or Ohio University, my beloved alma mater, is also a member of AAUW as well as a college and university partner. So there's a lot going on and a lot of really good things to come.
Yes, yes, and that's the important part. And I think that's one of the sort of unique parts of America that we Americans don't fully appreciate, especially in comparison to other countries. We have so many citizens groups of various kinds. You know, they have various interests, and that was pointed out actually by Alexis de Tocqueville when he visited America in the 1830s. One of the many cogent things that he noticed about the United States.
Well, a lot of people are very civic-minded, and I tell you what, this last election, kind of what's been going on over the past year, the amazing women's marches that we had in D.C., which I was fortunate enough to be at, and we had AAUW delegations at pretty much every march across the country, more than 600 women's marches nationwide, wow, and more than 100 internationally. This was a movement,
yes,
and it wasn't anti-Trump so much as it was, I mean, obviously there were concerns about the president, but it was very much about what our values are and talking about the issues that we care about and being a community. And I found it really inspiring. Sometimes, you know, with my job, you can get a little cynical. And I really needed this march after this past, you know, 2016 was a tough year. And seeing that march, seeing how many people came out, men and women, all stripes, really together, talking about all kinds of different issues, but finding community together and in standing up to bias and bigotry and standing up to incivility and standing up to policies that don't help working people. And I was pretty excited about it.
Yes.
And I was excited that AAUW was such a big part of it as well.
Yes. Well, I have my...
Is this the hat you wore?
Yes, this is the hat that I wore. They call this a cat hat. The cat hat, and I think it was actually invented out in Los Angeles, which I think they said had perhaps the largest march of all.
No, D.C. was the largest one.
D.C. was
but
large.
L.A. and Chicago and Boston were also quite large. But we had marches that were 60 people versus marches that were 1 million people. So it didn't matter where you were, if you were in Boise, Idaho, or Muncie, Indiana, there was a march for you.
Yes, really wonderful. And I think everyone was surprised at how large the marches were.
You know, when I started hearing how many sister marches there were, it made me wonder how many would come to D.C., because why come to D.C. if you've got one in your neighborhood, you know? And so I was wondering if that would cut down how much we had in terms of attendance, but it didn't. It was a huge number. Our delegation numbered at least upwards of 1,000, and that was just at the D.C. March. And the crowds were tremendous. In fact, we ended up not quote-unquote marching because there were so many. Yes, there were so many people that the parade route was essentially closed down. And so when the rally part was over, people left, and it became these like 6 or 7 different marches as people walked, you know, streets to get back to wherever they'd come from. So it was a really. I've lived in D.C. more than 20 years now, and I have never seen D.C. taken over that way in a peaceful, cooperative way, but just the sheer number and the sheer volume of people was amazing.
Yes. Well, I went to the local march that was closest to us, which was in Chillicothe. And you know, Chillicothe was one of the original capitals. It was a capital before Columbus.
Right, and it has an OU branch as well.
Yes, and Chillicothe is so important for Ohio history because the Great Seal was drawn up in Chillicothe.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you can see some mountains that look kind of like this, wiggly in the background of the Great Seal. And that's the scene that you see from Chillicothe. If you look to the east, probably to the west as well. I don't know, of course it's on the Scioto River. But, and I was wearing a sash with a button. And I'd had that sash for at least 10 years. But I hadn't looked that closely at one that said, "Let Ohio women vote." But when I looked at it closely, I saw there are the mountains from the Great Seal in the background, and there are arrows on one side and wheat, sheaves of wheat on the other,
Right.
just like on the Great
Seal
Seal.
of the United States, yeah.
And I pointed that out to the lady in Chillicothe, who actually, you know, she had seen that button before.
I'm sure, yeah.
But it was, everyone felt so good about being there, I think.
I think it was energizing. I think people were looking for not just an outlet in terms of any frustration or concerns that they've had this past year and since the election, but I think people were also looking for a sense of community and a sense of, well, what can I do? How can I help?
Yes.
And that's where a group like AAUW can be so great, because we have more than 1,000 branches across the country. We've got almost 900 college and university partners, and as I mentioned, OU is one of them. We've got student chapters across the country, and it's a great grassroots organization in the best traditional sense of the word, in terms of doing the work that matters, that the local branch believes matters to the community, and that fits in with AAUW's mission. And we advance women's equity through education, philanthropy, research, and advocacy. And so there's a lot of room there in terms of finding what fits your interest as well as what fits your community.
Yes. Well, I have a teal being our sort of color. I'm not too sure. But
yeah, we had a change here recently, but a lot of people are still sticking with the great teal machine. I see the teal a lot.
Is there a new color?
It's like a navy blue and green. It's with the new logo.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, I have the old logo around too. You see my T-shirt here.
Yeah. Well, you know, a group's been around for 100 years. They can refresh the logo.
Yes. Oh, right, and actually more than 100 years.
Yeah, 135.
135
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah. I think the only women's group more venerable than us is the YWCA.
Ah, okay.
Everybody else, I think, is pretty much the new kids on the block. Even now is just a little over 50 years old. So
that's right.
AAUW's been around for a long time doing this work, and you know, I've been really gratified to see in the past year the continued growing interest in not just women's issues, but the understanding that women's issues are family issues.
Yes.
And that it's really something that is good for everybody, that lifts all boats. So whether you're talking about pay equity, or you're talking about Title IX and campus sexual assault, if you're looking at women's health issues, all of these things really impact all of us, because we've all got women we care about in our lives.
Yes. Well, it's keeps you busy, I'm sure.
More than a little busy, yes.
I think you said you were a lobbyist at times.
I am, yeah. I'm actually one of those interesting entities in D.C. called a registered lobbyist, and all that means is that both the Senate and the House, as well as the executive branch, the White House, know that I'm someone who's advocating for a specific position. So there are lobbyists of all stripes working on all different issues. You have big corporations like Exxon that have lobbyists, and you have nonprofits like, you know, do-gooder nonprofits like AAUW that have lobbyists.
Yes, and there are. Do you ever get together with other lobbyists, and is it more competitive or is it more cooperative, would you say?
Know, it depends on the issue.
Sure.
And, you know, for AAUW, of course, we're nonpartisan, and we have a kind of a tripartisan membership. I mean, we have, again, members of all stripes. So I often will work with lobbyists, or at least policy analysts from other organizations that have similar interests. And sometimes I'll work with them today on equal pay, and against them tomorrow trying to stop school vouchers. So the other thing is that depending on the issue, your coalition can change some.
That's right, and that's good. That's the American way.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's real important for AAUW to work with whoever will work with us on the issues that we care about.
Right.
There's, unfortunately, I think a fair amount of groups that use kind of a litmus test that if you don't agree with us on everything, we won't work with you on anything. And AAUW has never been that way. And I think that's a strength, quite frankly, and more effective in terms of doing this kind of advocacy.
Right. Well, do you have regular things that you must do? I mean, like on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you go to the Capitol or something like that?
It depends. One of the things we always do is look at the committee schedules, see if any of our issues have hearings, see if any of our issues are up for a vote. That will greatly impact what we do that week. AUW also has this really unique thing called the AUW Action Fund. It's the Capitol Hill Lobby Corps. And this is a group of AAUW members that comes to Washington, D.C. from Maryland, Virginia, and the district every week and lobbies Congress while it's in session. So we're the only grassroots group out there that has a group of kind of citizen lobbyists, lay lobbyists, if you will, that come to D.C. every Thursday that Congress is in session. They can hit about 100 offices in a day. And we will prepare them with a briefing and letters to leave behind so they have a unified message and appropriate talking points, but it's a hugely effective tool in terms of getting our message across and reminding members of Congress that their constituents are paying attention and their constituents do care how they vote. They do care what they say on the floor. They are watching, so to speak.
Yes. Well, I was looking back through some of my old files, and it refreshes your memory. I recall the time in 1989, certainly, when I reread things, when they had a special lobby day, I think. I mean, I don't believe it was associated with like an AAUW convention in D.C., but it was a boiling hot day in summer. And high humidity. It was 95.
Oh, the nation's capital can just roast you in the summertime. But we do have, we have our national convention every 2 years.
Yes.
And so every third convention or every 6 years, it's in Washington, D.C. for the express purpose of having a lobby day. So this year's convention in June is going to be in Washington, D.C., and we'll have 1,000 members that will go up to the Hill and lobby their members of Congress.
Oh, yes. Well, then maybe it was. If
it
it's
may have
like every 6 years.
It is about that every 6 years, yeah.
Right. Well, I know that I've been to several conventions. I remember going to one convention, I think it was like 69. Anyway, it was during the Vietnam War, and my husband and I were protesters of the Vietnam War. So I proposed a resolution, which didn't go anywhere.
No.
But and especially groups always have provisions for deadlines when you should send in proposals and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which is important. But I remember that time, like I say, that was quite a long time ago, more than 40 years ago now.
Well, and our conventions have changed and shifted through the years as our membership has changed, They used to be very focused on kind of parliamentary procedure and approving the public policy program and lots of Robert's Rules of Order. And now we spend more time on programming and leadership development and advocacy training. We still have our public policy program approved by our membership. It's done, by vote, but it's done by ballot instead of, voice for it on the floor. And that has freed up some time for this biennial conference to actually, I think, do a little bit more in terms of providing some good experiences for the members and giving them real ideas to take home to continue the mission. Right.
Well, and I know there are AAUW has a number of special projects, and like in the state of Ohio, we have Camp Be Wise, or Be Wise Camp for women in science and energy.
Science, technology, engineering, and math? STEM?
Yeah, STEM.
Yeah.
STEM things.
The STEM work with girls that AAUW does is so important, and we've done some groundbreaking research that shows if you introduce girls to STEM fields at a younger age, they're much more likely to pursue those fields. But there's still a lot of stereotypes and barriers to women getting into those fields. So AAUW's camps that kind of helps get young girls on the path to seeing science as cool, as a viable career in their future, can make a big difference and do wonders, I think, for for girls' self-esteem, for their achievements in math as well as science. And our members have always done such a great job with that. In Athens, the branch here is very interested in doing that kind of work, and I'm excited about that because it literally changes a little girl's life.
Yes, and last night we were talking with a couple of our newer members in the Athens branch, and it was interesting. Both of them are young mothers, you know, or they have young girls,
right.
but getting on to middle school, high school age. And both of them really became involved with AAUW because the local branch had started. Melanie Shorey, the branch president, was particularly interested in having some STEM projects.
Yeah.
And I think they're looking forward to a fourth, you know, it's in the late spring.
A camp.
A camp here locally. Well, a one-day event. This is
like a day camp.
Different.
Yeah.
Yes. This is like a day camp, a one-day event, or maybe couple of days events right here in Athens. Whereas the Camp Be Wise is a state project of AAUW, which meets on a college campus.
And it's an overnight camp. It's sleepaway.
Yes.
Yeah.
They go for a week. And that's been very successful over the years.
Yeah.
I brought this is a scrapbook from the 90s. And I think we have some pictures in there, although it may be in the other one. You can see this is pretty hefty. This was like 93, 94.
You know, any binder full of AUW women is always going to be hefty. There's always so much work that you all do at the local level and at the state level. I know AAUW Ohio is real active in terms of state policy issues. And of course, you know, at the national level where we try to work nationwide to do what we can to improve the lives of working families and women and girls in particular, and really intersectionally, girls of color in particular as well. And I think that's a really important thing to remember as well. You know, we all come to the table with our own baggage, our own identity, but we're not just one thing. We're not just a woman or just an African American or just, you know, a middle class person. I mean, all these identities wrap up and really make us who we are. But as we do this kind of work, we have to keep that in mind because not there's no one size fits all. Everybody's different.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was looking around to see what I had from AAUW over the years, and in addition to a couple of files and a couple of scrapbooks, one of the things I found was a book about Lily Ledbetter.
Oh, yes.
Which I got from AAUW a couple of years back.
It's called Grace and Grit, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lily's a good friend of mine. Lily Ledbetter is a modern-day shero. She is an amazing person who, you know, was really discriminated against in terms of equal pay and knew when she was going to file that lawsuit that it was not going to be an easy row to hoe.
Right.
And I remember her telling me she went home to her family and said, here's the scoop. I've been discriminated against. It's money that our whole family should have had, you know, to make our lives easier. And here's what I like to do, but I need your support if it's going to happen. And her family was 100% behind her. And that case, you know, went all the way to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, it got a bad decision in 2007. But literally, we're just now at the 8th anniversary, Congress passed a bill to right the Supreme Court's wrong. It was called the Lily Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. It was signed into law either the 28th or 29th of January. It was the first bill that then President Obama signed in 2009.
In 2009.
Yeah, it was the very first bill that he signed. And I was able to be there for the signing representing AUW, which was pretty great. And since then, AUW and Lily have worked together to really advance equal pay issues, to advance work on these things for women at the federal level. But also at the state and local level too, because you know things have been a little gridlocked in Washington D.C. So we can't put all our eggs in that basket.
That's true.
Yeah.
And what is done at the state level is very important as well.
It's hugely important because a lot of times state and local government impacts, or at least people feel like it impacts them more. And they're a little bit closer to it in terms of perhaps knowing their representatives and so forth. But it's important because, especially when you're not getting great action at the federal level, to think about other creative ways to push your mission forward. And doing that in the state legislature here, or say in the, the Athens City Council, is always a good, viable option.
Right. Yes, well, I know they were talking for a long time about how this pay equity thing is, and AAUW has worked on that over the years. Yeah. Over the years.
And a lot of research on it too, because, for a long time, one of the biggest questions we faced was just skepticism that the gender pay gap even existed. So we did a lot of research using government data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Labor and so forth, the census data. And, the stat right now is that the average woman makes about 80 cents on the dollar of the average man. Now, that's not an apples to apples comparison, right? That's not this woman with this exact same education with this man and the same exact job. That's the overall comparison.
Yeah.
But it's still a red flag to see that there's such a difference. And I think curious people look at that and say, well, why is there such a difference? So we did a great study called Behind the Pay Gap. And we controlled, in terms of the study, we did a very serious regression analysis, and we controlled for everything but the kitchen sink. We controlled for major, we controlled for occupation, we controlled for degree, we controlled for hours worked, we controlled for GPA, the grade point average. I mean, we controlled for everything that reasonable people like you and I would say, well, sure, that could impact how much you make. That could make you make less or more than someone else.
Right.
And when we did that, what we found was that 1 year out of college, so this is 1 year, and that's probably when men and women are about as equal as they're going to be, right?
Sure.
1 year out of college, there's already a 7% gap.
I know. That's one of the things that
same
really
major,
struck me
same
immediately.
Field, right?
Yes.
Same. And the thing that was crazy to me about that is that 7% is normally what we'd look at as bias, as discrimination. But if you look 10 years down the road, and this is a specific data set tracking people longitudinally, we found that that gap almost doubles. Again, same major, same field. Almost a little over 12%. Women are making 12% less, even though they're more likely to get master's degrees now than men. So here we have a situation where we've controlled for everything that seems reasonable. If they're working more hours, if they're working in a more dangerous job, all the things that naysayers like to say, well, this is why there's a pay gap. Or my favorite is when they say women choose to make less. Never met a woman in my life who chose to make less. But the reality is that there is a gap. Part of it is absolutely unexplained by anything but discrimination and bias. And at the end of the day, we need to do something about that, because it's not just about simple fairness for those women, although of course it is, but it's also about the economic security of their family. It's also about a thriving tax base for their community. It's also about making sure that people can support themselves instead of needing to rely on public services as much. So it's a living wage kind of issue.
Yes.
And quite frankly, companies that pay better, in other words, that have smaller pay gaps and have more diverse workforces, are more profitable. It's been shown over and over and over again. So it's not just about simple fairness, it's actually good business.
Right. And one of the other interesting things is that you often hear the sort of average figure, but if that is broken down according to the ethnic background and so on, white women are, at the top of the heap, and down lower and lower where you have.
Well, you know what we do? We celebrate something called Equal Pay Day, which in 2017 will be April 4th. And that is ostensibly the day that American women need to work into the next year to earn what men did in 2016, right?
Yeah, right.
But if you break that down, so in other words, they got to work 3 or 4 months longer before they make what men did in the last calendar year. But when you break that down by race and ethnicity, we see, and quite frankly by parentage, right, as well, by moms, moms' equal pay day isn't until June,
Is that right?
African American women's equal pay day isn't until usually around August.
Uh-huh.
And Latina's equal pay day is until November. So they have to work almost 2 years, almost 2 full years to earn what men did in the previous calendar year.
The Hispanics.
Yeah. So there's job segregation issues in there, there's job choice issues in there, but there's also a lot of stereotypes at play and a lot of discrimination at play that we need to deal with.
Right, because often it turns out that people really, men, let's be honest, okay, men, straightforwardly, sometimes men just don't, they don't want to see someone like themselves. They hire people.
It's, I think it's human nature to kind of surround ourselves with people who look just like us.
Yeah.
And so, in the current power structure, that's mostly white men, and so they're more likely to feel comfortable with white men.
Right.
That's not good, bad, or indifferent unless they start discriminating as a result. And the reality there, of course, is, again, with diversity, both based on gender, based on race and ethnicity, based on economic class, we know that those kinds of diverse teams are much more creative. They tend to have better retention rates, so you're not constantly out there trying to hire new people. And they tend to be more profitable because they have more voices at the table to come up with a much more comprehensive either solution to whatever problem they're addressing or a better targeted product, all of those things. So there's studies out there that show very clearly Fortune 500 companies with more diverse boards of directors make more money. So this isn't just about, feminism or women's issues or simple fairness. It literally is about a strong economy. It's about global competitiveness. It's about being able to be innovative with everybody at the table and coming up with the best products, the best services that we can to compete in a competitive global environment, but also right around the corner.
Right. Well, and we've pointed out that AAUW does work in a whole range of fields, in education, in women's rights issues, in pay equity issues, in legal advocacy. Wasn't Lily Ledbetter supported by the Legal Advocacy Fund of AAUW?
We didn't actually support her specific case only because at that point we had a rule that we only took cases that were taking place on college campuses.
Oh, I see.
But her case and the fact that we became the leading group to pass her bill and became such great friends of hers caused us to change the eligibility rules for our legal advocacy fund so that it's not just campus-based discrimination now. It's really any kind of workplace. We're essentially looking for potential precedent-setting cases that could make a difference, not just for the woman or women involved or men involved in that case, but for women nationwide.
Right. Well, I was really struck by your little anecdote last night that you told about your very early experience in advocacy. And I think that the viewers would be interested in hearing a shortened account of what happened.
Yeah. Well, for me it was something that happened to me when I was 8 years old, going to school in a small rural elementary school in Northeast Ohio. I'm from a small town called Hinckley. And it was my first taste of advocacy, and it was my first taste of going it alone when I wanted to make a change versus how much more powerful it is when people work in groups. And the little story is I was 8 years old, and our poor rundown school did not have bathroom doors on the girls' stalls. They'd broken and they'd never fixed them. And so we just kept doing what we needed to do, but found out later that the boys, in fact, did have doors on their stalls.
Oh, my.
And I know at least practically my little 8-year-old brain was like, well, we certainly would use those doors more than the boys do. And so I went to the principal and I asked him really specifically, could we get doors on the girls' bathrooms? And I was really sure he was going to take care of it because this is the kind of guy he was. He's just a good man, and I was sure giving him my problem, he would fix it. And he literally kind of patted me on the head and said, Lisa, we got a lot of other problems. This is the late 70s, the Rust Belt in Cleveland, the last great kind of recession. And he basically said, no, we just have other priorities. And I remember leaving that discussion and thinking, I don't really think he took me seriously. I don't really think he understood that this was important. And certainly now it became an issue of of fairness that the boys had doors and we didn't.
Right.
So I thought about it long and hard over the weekend, and when I came back to school on Monday, I started a petition.
A petition drive
Petition
at age
drive,
8.
yeah.
How about
So,
that?
As you can imagine, it was a little hard to get some of my friends to sign on at first, because they knew I was going to give the petition to the principal, and they didn't want to get in trouble. But at the end of the day, I was able to get 10 or 15 of my friends to sign on, and once that happened, you know, then it kind of snowballed. Then it was like everybody wanted to sign the petition. By Friday, even the boys were signing the petition. We had more than 200 names, and it was essentially the second and third grade of our elementary school. But then, of course, the rubber met the road.
Yeah, you had to go see the principal.
I had to go see the principal, right? I had to actually give him this petition. And it was just this great little girl's petition with, you know, Hello Kitty stickers and markers decorating it. But I'll never forget putting it on his desk and just literally saying to him, Mr. Ginky, I'm not the only one who wants doors. And, you know, a couple weeks later, we had the doors, which is, if you think about it, it's such a powerful lesson to learn at 8 years old, where I went in there by myself, made a reasonable request to the right person, and not only did I not get it, but I kind of got disrespected. I kind of got dissed. They weren't real interested. But when I went in there with 200 of my best friends at my back, I was heard, I was respected, and we got what we wanted. And that is, to me, in many respects, a metaphor for AAUW. In terms of understanding that one person can change the world, but it's so much more fun to do it in groups, and oftentimes much more effective when you can speak with one voice, where you can find agreement. So came to find out later that both my mom and the school secretary had backed me up. I had not even told my mom what I was doing, and the principal had called her after I left the office wanting to know what she'd put me up to this time. And you know, at the end of the day, though, it was a group of little girls and eventually little boys, but it was also these 2 adult women who had our backs when they needed to. And I think that's really important as well, especially in these times, to understand how small things can make a huge difference.
Yes. Well, you say you were here at Ohio University in the late 80s. What did you major in and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I did a double major in political science and sociology, and I got a women's studies certificate at the same time, which was something that you could get here at that point. I was a resident assistant, and then I was an area resident assistant. I lived on East Green the whole time, Shively and Perkins and Washington Hall.
Oh, really?
And then I also had a student job in Chubb Hall and student records. So I was definitely working my way through school. And just loved being at Ohio University. Got a good education and have wonderful memories. And from there I went to Ohio State to work on my first master's degree. And that really kind of launched me into the world that I am now, in terms of doing what I like to euphemistically call women's work.
Yes. So you were at Ohio State as well.
Yeah, for my first master's, I did a master's in women's studies there, and that's where I actually started teaching women's studies. Then I went out and worked for a while, worked at Wittenberg University, and then I ran a battered women's program up in Marion, Ohio for several years. And then I went back to graduate school for a political communication journalism degree, and that was from there I got a fellowship that put me on Capitol Hill. And I started to work for a member of Congress out of New York City. And you know, it was really a dream come true to do that kind of policy work at that level. And then from there, you know, went to a variety of different advocacy groups that care about women's issues and family issues to do kind of the advocacy piece of it, the other side of it. And I've been at AAUW now for just a little over 14 years.
But, and so you say you've lived in D.C. for 20 years.
Yeah, a little over 20.
And so what was it again that you were doing before you went to AAUW? What were you doing in D.C.?
Yeah, so I received a congressional fellowship in women in public policy from the Women's Research and Education Institute, and they placed me on Capitol Hill in a congressional office, so that's how I got my start on Capitol Hill. And once I finished there, then I was at the American Physical Therapy Association, I was at the Older Women's League, and then I was at the now Legal Defense and Education Fund, which is now called Legal Momentum. But AUW has definitely been definitely been the place nearest and dearest to my heart.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, I was not only a legacy, but I've been a member elsewhere. I was a member, for instance, the year that Bob had sabbatical leave, and we were in Northern Virginia at that time.
Yeah.
And I do remember going once or twice into D.C. and you know, doing something with the AAUW there.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear a lot of our Capitol Hill Lobby Corps members come from Northern Virginia.
Yes, right, and so it's been a. Well, I was also involved in Maine. Bob taught his first 3 years at college level at the University of Maine in Orono. And so we were there for the 3 years, and our youngest child was born there. Our middle child, our son, David, who lives here in Athens, which is very nice to have a child
I would
nearby.
say so. My mother would like that.
But he was born in D.C.
Okay.
Actually, during the time we were there in D.C. And when I was in Maine, I was I did there were only 7 branches in Maine at the time. So it wasn't a really big job, you know, like states that have 40 or 50 branches. But I was a newsletter editor.
Oh, great.
But they only had like one thing, I think, during that year. Of course, this was long, long years ago, maybe 1962.
But it shows the longevity, right, of an organization
Yes.
like AAUW, how you know, the mission continues, and as you move around, it's great for members to have that kind of ready-made community,
Yes.
you know, of people that you already know where to start from because they're AAUW members. It's a great way to get into the community and find your legs in a new home.
Right. But there are international ties as well.
Yes.
When we were in England, I went to the local library in Richmond near London, and I saw a little notice on the bulletin board that said, you know, the British Federation of University Women meeting is such and such a time, and had a phone number and so forth. So I called them up, and they said, oh, you know, that would be interesting.
Yeah,
you know?
you'd be
very
welcome.
nice if you would come, and I did. And the year we were in Spain, I went to 1 or 2 meetings of the Spanish in Madrid. So there are these kinds of ties which are very large, international. We have people like Virginia Gildersleeve, who was a founder of the International Federation of University Women.
That's right.
And she was a dean of women at Barnard College, Columbia University, for many years.
Right.
But as I say, a founder of IFUW in the early 1920s. And she was the only woman who was on the delegation that wrote the United Nations Charter
Oh, really?
in San Francisco
Yeah.
in 1945. And I can remember that time. I mean, I was in 8th grade in 1944-45, and she was working away in San Francisco for 3 months with the, of course, international group
Right.
that was drawing up the Charter of the
Right.
United Nations. And I've always been very interested in the United Nations. And now they have another group loosely related to AAUW and the IFUW, which is called the Virginia Gildersleeve Fund. And they have scholarships and fellowships for international women.
Right.
And there's a whole area of AAUW we haven't even mentioned.
That's right, because we have ECOSOC status at the United Nations, and we participate in the status on the Commission of Women here events every March, and you know, have an interest in that international work as well as our federal, state, and local work.
And the fact that AAUW has these wonderful scholarships and fellowships.
Yeah, you know, I mean, AAUW branches around the country do amazing work raising money for high school scholarships or scholarships for high school girls to go to college. But also they've done this amazing work that we continue on at the national level. We are the largest grantor of women's graduate scholarships in the world. We give away anywhere from $3 to $5 million a year for women pursuing graduate work, PhDs, writing their dissertations.
Yes.
And these are the kinds of awards that change the world, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Madame Curie was able to get her first gram of radium because of AUW's support. Rachel Carson wrote The Silent Spring and kicked off the environmental movement because of AUW's support. She used her research money to write that book. And even as recently as Melissa Harris Perry really will always give credit to AUW for helping her have the funds she needed for the child care she so desperately needed to finish up her PhD. So, you can see AUW's work throughout the ages, but also, throughout our history, but also right up into today, and that's always really gratifying.
Right, and people you don't realize got backing from AAUW.
That's right.
Locally here, Dr. Dina Lopez, who's a geologist, had a fellowship to come from Costa Rica to the U.S. And later she's been on the faculty now for almost 20 years.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
Time.
That's pretty great.
And Dr. Margaret Peg Cohn, who was the head of the Honors Tutorial College for many years.
That's where I recognize that name.
Yes. She had a domestic fellowship to go, and of course she's an American citizen, to go to Yale, I believe it was, where she got her degree in a biological sciences area, and then later was Honors Tutorial Dean. So there are people, women that you can meet every day who have benefited from AAUW fellowships.
Yeah, that's very true.
It's a very large program, a very important one. So we do a lot of things, don't we?
And we're always looking for more members, more supporters. You can go to aauw.org. You can sign up for our Action Network, which is a free e-advocacy bulletin to get all the latest on what's going on in Washington, D.C. and in your state capital in Columbus. And that's also where you can join and find out the branch near you, because we are nationwide. We have branches in every state, every congressional district, and there's usually something for everybody.
Yeah. And it's marvelous that our group here is reinvigorated, and especially through this wonderful project involving helping girls
get into the STEM fields, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's
science, technology, and engineering and math.
That's right.
STEM, very important. Well, all education is important, but STEM fields have almost traditionally been less welcoming, less inclusive, and
for both women and people of color,
yeah.
truthfully. And,
Right.
and part of our interest is one, those STEM fields can pay much better.
yes,
Right?
that's true.
But two, when it comes to innovation, there are real consequences when you don't have women at the table, when you don't have people of color at the table. I think of the early tales of airbags in cars. And if you remember, when they first came out, there were petite women who were dying from airbags, smacking them in the face. And part of that was because it was an all-male team that developed the airbags, who never really thought about someone under 5'5" and less than 100 pounds and how that would impact them. For a long time, they told women they couldn't be astronauts because they didn't have astronaut suits that fit women. But that was also because they didn't have women helping to design the suits. So there was nothing about their plumbing that worked well, or the sizes or anything. So it's not just about fairness, but it's also when you have more people at the table with different experiences, you're just going to get a better product, and you're going to get something that works for more people.
Yeah. Well, we've pretty well covered the whole gamut, but I asked Matt to take a picture and show us a picture of the founder of the Athens branch of AAUW. In 1927, Dean Irma Voigt founded the local branch. So it's 90 years this year.
90 years this year of
90
AAUW
years
in
this
Athens.
year.
It's pretty exciting.
Right. Well, she was quite a gal. She was one of the pioneer deans of women, and she came to Ohio University in 1913.
Wow.
And
we have Voight Hall named after her.
yes, Voight Hall, with the beautiful big white columns on College Street,
Yep.
is named for Dean Voight. I never met her because we came after her passing away, but she was quite active. She was active as in the deans of women. As I say, she was a pioneer dean of women, and she was president of the American Association of Deans of Women in the 1930s. So she was a person who really...
She broke a lot of ground for women.
She did.
And in particular, women in Ohio coming to OU, and that's a, you know, that's a debt of gratitude. We need to keep remembering her, and I'm glad that we have a building named after her so that people can find out more. She lived a pretty amazing life and was ahead of her time in so many ways.
Right. And one of the fellowships that we talked about before, she left some money to the association specifically for a fellowship. And since then, they've added money from another person who left you know, legacy to AAUW for fellowships.
Well, you know, and part of the reason why they started the Fellows Program is that even today, there is that whole publish or perish idea for tenure-track faculty. And especially back then, it was really difficult for women faculty members to get grants, to get research money. They just didn't give it to women. And so AAUW members said, fine, we'll put our money where our mouth is, and we'll get them the research money they need so that they can get into that tenure track, and we can get more women in the professoriate. We can have more women at the front of the classrooms. You know, it's that old saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And we wanted to put women in leadership positions, not just in higher education, but throughout the nation, so that other little girls could see, you know, perhaps a different future for themselves.
Yes. So that's one of the other things that I wanted to be sure that we mentioned. And we are reviving again, and I'm not sure that there's a specific time that the local branch gets together, but I know I've missed a couple of meetings already because I didn't think fast enough and to put down on my calendar, you know, such and such a day and such a place.
That's right.
One time I went searching, and it turned out that I went on Monday night and they were meeting on Tuesday night.
Well, you know, the thing is that AAUW has this branch structure for people who want to get together on a regular basis to do good works in the community. But I also want to stress that for folks maybe who are a little too busy or feel like they can't make meetings like that, that being a member of the branch is still absolutely a viable option. They're always looking for that kind of support, or being a member of AAUW nationally, at large. Because we're always looking for more people to lend their voices. And you don't always have to be the one who's always at the table, but counting yourself amongst our numbers can make a big difference.
Right, and there is a regular, is it quarterly or is it biennial, the AAUW publication?
Oh yeah, the magazine Outlook. Yep.
To every member.
And there's so much more. I mean, if you go to our website at aauw.org, you will find out so much information about campus programming, leadership programming, the advocacy and public policy work that we do, great examples of our research on a variety of topics that impact women and girls, and also information on these fellowships and grants. And if you're someone who wants to apply, you should check that out and see if AAUW can't help you on your way.
Right, and the studies that we've done that you mentioned earlier, like Shortchanging Girls, which came out about 20 years ago.
Yeah, it was in the 90s, I think.
Right, and following up on research of sometimes not discrimination that was not, they didn't sit up nights thinking, what can I do to hurt women or anything like that, of course. Most men have very good relations with women. But unconscious discrimination which happens to a lot of people.
Our latest research report is called Barriers and Bias, and
really?
it looks at women in leadership. And you can actually go to our website, again, that's AAUW.org, and you can take a test. You have to have a computer with keys and stuff. You can't do it on your mobile phone.
Interesting.
But you can actually take a test that will score your bias about women in leadership position. And even women who identify as feminists oftentimes hold unconscious stereotypes, often very unflattering, about women leaders. So we have to check our own baggage at the door first. So check out that test. You might find it very interesting.
Yes, indeed. Well, Lisa Maatz has been my guest today. She's here because you're speaking tonight. What is the event? Where is it?
It's part of the 90-minute series out of the Scripps School of Communications and Journalism, and I believe it's in Morton Hall tonight.
Morton Hall, yeah, that's right. I have seen that.
Right.
Yes.
And I think afterwards they will also put a link to it up on the school's website, so that even if people aren't able to come tonight, they can catch it later. And we'll be talking about gender and race and politics in 2017.
Yeah. Well, that of course this won't go out before tonight, but people will be able to check up on it afterwards.
They sure will. They sure will.
That really is great. And once again, thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay. This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday.